My name is Alison Carr-Chellman. I'm happy to be here. I'm very grateful for the invitation to keynote your conference here on Thursdays, Keynote. And I'm wondering, just trying to get a sense of who you all are. This is my first time with you, so I'll just ask, how many of you are working at institutions of higher education as teacher educators? Okay, excellent. And how many of you are practitioners in public schools today, teaching? Great. And the rest of you who didn't raise your hands, yell out a couple of things that you do. Evaluation, consultant, grad student. How many of us are grad students? I have one of my own graduate students here. Priscilla, where are you? You moved. You were over here and you moved over there. We're the only ones from Penn State, she informed me, but I was happy to see a friendly face this morning when I came in. So thank you all for just giving me a quick sense of the audience. I always like to have an idea of where we are. Today I'm going to be talking to you about some things that are probably going to be rather challenging to you, maybe, quite different. In some cases, I will make you angry, I hope. And as one of my most favorite mentors, David Jonathan, used to say, if people don't leave a talk that you've given, if at least a few people don't leave with a headache, you haven't done your job. So I'll try and do my job as best I can according to Dr. Jonathan. But I am honored to be here and again grateful for the invitation, and for those of you who were early risers and willing to get up this morning, I appreciate that also. This is the Bring Back the Boys project. How many of you I did a TED Talk on this. How many of you have already seen that? Okay, good. That helps me just have a sense of how quickly to skim over. It sounds like a lot of you haven't, which is fine. That's about a 13-minute snippet on what I'm going to be talking about today, but it also doesn't include a lot of the development of my thinking since that time. That was a talk that was given maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. And since then, I've done a number of research projects, some of which I'm going to share with you today if we have sufficient time. The Bring Back the Boys project is really focused on trying to think about how to re-engage boys in their own learning. And as you'll see in a minute, I think we've got some issues going on with boys. So first I want to ask you what you think boys are like. Now, I just want to remind you here, my purpose isn't to essentialize gender. If I do, you can dismiss me. And so that's not very helpful. Not all boys are the same. Not all girls are the same. We know that within any group, there's far more variation among individuals than there is between the groups. So there are lots of boys and lots of girly boys, and there are lots of tomboys, and there are lots of girls. And so now we're talking about central tendencies, that boys tend to be a particular way. So when I say boys are this way or that way, please understand that I mean that they tend to be a particular way. So this is what we wish that they were like. There they are. This is the first day of summer vacation, yeah? The first day of summer vacation, they're in a hammock and they're reading. Isn't that just what we would love to think of as a summer day? Here they are all ready for school and Boy Scouts, and that's mine. That little one's mine. Isn't he cute? Okay, so he's dancing at a wedding. These are what we wish boys were like. But what are they really like? This is what they're really like, right? They love video games, they love superheroes, and they love guns. They do. But they're not necessarily so fond of school. If you ask a boy this age, what's your favorite subject, what's the answers that you'll get? Recess, PE, lunch. Very rarely will you have someone say, I'm really into ancient Greece. Okay? Not at that age, anyway. This guy moves around a little bit. Okay. So, is this a problem? What is it that we're dealing with here? My argument is that it is a problem. And the outrageous thing that I have to say to you is the way to solve it is violent video games. That's a very odd thing to be saying. All right, but that's what I'm saying today. So, if you're a boy, in the TED Talk I give a lot of really nice images on all of these stats, but we run out of time if I do that here. So, you are 3 times or more as likely to be expelled, suspended in special education, learning disabled, or emotionally disturbed. Our population is still about 50-50, and yet if you talk to any reading teacher, she'll tell you that she's got 4 or 5 boys for every girl in her class. You are 4 times as likely to be identified with ADHD, and I want to put a little bit of a finer point on this just to make it clear here. ADHD in boys manifests very differently than it does in girls. Boys manifest ADHD as loud and difficult behavior, non-focus activity of that kind that is very obvious to the teacher. Girls manifest ADHD in very quiet and withdrawn ways. And so they are less likely to be diagnosed. Therefore, it's not clear exactly whether this has to do with underdiagnosis or not, but it's probably part of the issue. Just the same, we medicate our boys unbelievably. 75 to 80% of the world's supply of ADHD medications is being administered to American boys. That's an unbelievable statistic to me. And then I have to ask the question, are we really medicating them because they're boys? This is their normal way of living in the world, and we're basically telling them this is unacceptable in the school system? I argue that, in fact, that's exactly what we're doing. All right. Those of you who are into Pisa tests, they're very problematic, I find, because Pisa tests, these are international, everybody familiar with Pisa tests? International global examinations that are given, and this is how we get the BP advertisement that says, that has little bubbles and it shows where the United States is, and it's always lower than we want it to be. But those tests are very problematic for a variety of reasons. Nevertheless, there's this interesting comparative thing that we can do over time with Pisa tests. And what's interesting is that always, boys have lagged behind girls in reading, language arts, literature, English, language skills of all kinds, right? And girls have always lagged behind in math and science until now. The first administration of the Pisa tests, which showed globally girls were outpacing boys in every subject: math, science, technology, reading, language, literacy, everything, in almost every country where girls have adequate access to education. Don't get me wrong, we are not out of the woods as far as women and girls, equality, issues around access to education are enormous in certain developing countries. We cannot ignore that. And yet, for the first time in our history, globally, we have a clear problem in which girls are outpacing boys in every subject in almost every country. Within higher education, we have this rather unbelievable chart, right? That little X shows the number of people earning degrees. That's not admitted, but earning, all right? About 60% of undergraduate degrees this year will go to women. The nexus of the X, I'm not sure what that term is 1983, just to give you a sense. And the projected are in slightly grayed boxes. So what you know is pretty interesting is that up until those grade boxes has actually happened. That is where we are. Now in higher education, I would argue we're losing men and boys because we lost them when they were 4, not because we lost them when they hit the university gates. All right? They became disengaged in their education, they became disinterested, and they simply checked out. They go because somebody's told them that they have to, but they don't go because they're really ready to go to college in many cases. And if you talk to somebody who teaches undergraduate, large undergraduate courses at a place like Penn State University, they will universally tell you it's true. The men don't come prepared to do the work, to do the homework, to engage in their learning, and the women tend to come prepared. Not all, but most. This makes university administrators quite uncomfortable, especially when we get into small liberal arts schools, which is where we see the vast majority of this differential expanding significantly. When you get to 70% female at a small liberal arts college, it makes everybody very nervous because girls don't want to go to colleges where there aren't boys to date. And for those people who are saying, you know, from a feminist perspective, why are you putting this out there? As a feminist myself, I would like to find a wonderful mate for my own daughter someday, and I am concerned that it's going to be more and more difficult for her to find someone of equal educational level of attainment based on these kinds of statistics. So we all really need to worry about this. Women need to worry about it, men need to worry about it, and all of these statistics that I've just given you are unbelievably more critical when you look at poor kids, when you look at black boys, when you look at inner cities, any kind of minority or diversity issues, they expand exponentially. All right. Why is this happening? Well, I think that there are lots of reasons, but I want to focus on 3, and I'll make it as brief as I can or I'm going to run out of time quickly. The first is zero tolerance policies. I don't know how many people are aware that zero tolerance policies were not always the standard in American schools, but now zero tolerance policies are absolutely a standard. The notion of a zero tolerance policy is not a bad one. I don't want to see kids going into schools with guns. I'm not advocating for that, let me be clear. I'm not advocating for kids going into schools with knives or other weapons or drugs or alcohol or cigarettes if that's not allowed on that campus. So I'm not suggesting we get rid of zero tolerance policies. The problem is in the way that they are implemented. So the issue is that now, if you're on a playground, you can't go like this without getting suspended. You cannot have roughhousing on the playground anymore if you're a young boy without having a conversation with the school psychologist. You cannot write a story that might be very interesting to you but has a lot of violence in it without someone saying that there's something wrong and we better pay attention to this, especially in the elementary schools where we see this. So zero tolerance policies, I believe, are a cultural phenomenon that communicate to young boys that they don't belong in schools. Not in the presence of the policy, but the way it's lived out. Everybody is already aware of this. Everyone in this room is already aware that the curriculum has compressed significantly. What we went through as kindergartners is not what kindergartners are going through today. Much more testing, much more rigorous standards. We're asking them to read significant amounts of text by the end of kindergarten. If they're not able to write their name by the time they're 3 in a preschool program, they're flagged as developmentally disabled. Or developmentally delayed, excuse me. This is not developmentally appropriate. And most of us in this room would say, and even teachers, if you ask them, will say, it's not developmentally appropriate to push a young child at 5 years of age to read. Many times they're not really ready till they're 7 or 8. Homeschool populations already know this. People who have a single child at home will tell you, my child was ready to read at 5, but my other child was ready at 8, and it worked out just fine. Everybody's reading, everybody's okay. But that's not the way that we are comfortable accepting it in the classroom. The concern seems to be if your entire class is not reading by the end of kindergarten or first grade, then who gets the finger pointed? The teacher, right? That's the part of the problem, okay? There's this compressed curriculum. It puts a teacher in a terrible position. And in thinking about how to prepare teachers, we have to understand that this is not getting any better, and this is happening because politicians know that the public wants it. So who's to blame for compressed curriculum? We all are to blame for compressed curriculum. We want everybody to go to Harvard, and as a result, we've created a monster in the system that doesn't allow kids to engage in their own learning. It directs every minute, it's coercive, as Alfie Kohn would say, and it's just not a way that many kids really want to learn. And particularly for boys and all active kids, the compressed curriculum is not working. Lastly, we have very, very few men in the elementary level classroom. Our numbers have been cut in half. 17 years ago, we had 93% of elementary classroom teachers were women. Now, 97% of elementary classroom teachers are women, which means very few men are going into elementary school classrooms. We're trying to unpack that a little bit. We'll talk about that in a minute. I have a student who specifically wants to look at that question in his dissertation. I'm probably going to skip this. This is a website. I'll leave it up there at least long enough for y'all to see and maybe write down the website, because you won't find it any other way. It's hidden. It's not live yet. But the Bring Back the Boys website is a project that is meant to try to give parents some tools for how to think about educating boys and active kids. There are a number of videos on there, a number of different resources. We're working on it constantly. We've had a small grant from a foundation to do this work, and we hope in the next 4 or 5 months that we'll have a better website address and a better resource when we're ready to go live. For now, if you're dying to see what we've got, that's at least a little bit of a beginning for you. The next video that I'm going to show you is actually about Minecraft. Everybody know Minecraft? Anybody not know Minecraft? It's pretty good. If you've never seen it before, get on, look it up. It's pretty fun. And this is specifically talking, now this is a relatively, in my view anyway, a relatively benign and non-violent building kind of game, although there are zombie sheep. And so you got to kind of deal with the zombie sheep part of it, and there's some killing involved. But mostly it's a pretty fun game that seems to appeal to both boys and girls. It seems to cut across the huge, enormous gender divide that we have in gaming, in which most of the serious gaming is happening for boys and most of the social gaming is happening for girls. All right? So I'm just going to play a few seconds of this, well, maybe a minute of this video about Minecraft. I hope that the noise isn't too high, Mike.
You guys remember Minecraft. We made this other video about it that one time where we talked about how it's basically going to save us all. But in case you need a refresher, Minecraft is a computer game that can best be described as first-person Legos, with a dash of husbandry, a heaping helping of architecture, and a pinch of Slay the Dragon. In survival mode, you have to gather resources and materials and fight the bad guys, some of whom are very sneaky. In creative mode, you get to, ready for Nicolas Cage, go nuts. The pixely sky is the limit. You can build whatever you want, and then start a multiplayer game and invite all your friends. You can import and export 3D models to make structures. You can share your creations with your coworkers and pals, or your students towards the end of teaching them the finer bits of computer science, art history, engineering, civics, math, world history, and maybe most things. Say what? Now, before we get to talking about Minecraft specifically, let's talk about computer and video games in general as educational tools. There is a long history of using pixels to teach kids about stuff. For about as long as there have been affordable computers, there have been educational games to put on them. Logo taught you how to program that turtle, and Lemonade Stand taught you how to build your lemonade empire. Oregon Trail taught you, always ford the river. Never ford the river. Mavis Beacon, Reader Rabbit, Big Brain Academy, and the list goes on. They're all great games, but they all share a common, problematic shortcoming. What if you don't want to teach typing or reading? Sure, you could use Virtual U to teach management, or Zapitalism to teach economics, or Roller Coaster Tycoon to teach roller coastering. But these games can't be specialized or made immersive. They lack even the basic technology for fluidity or improvisation, two things which are paramount in teaching. Like, what if you want the game to be different every year, or every class, or collaborative, or portable? Or what if you're a grade school teacher and you have to teach 10 subjects, each with many units and ideas to cover? If only there were some way to build a fully customizable networked environment that was both fun and inexpensive. Aside from being an exceptionally effective way to avoid doing your homework, as it turns out, Minecraft is also an exceptionally effective teaching tool. Sorry if I just totally ruined Minecraft for you. Probability? Build a random animal dropper. Physics? Measure the time it takes a block to fall and then talk about gravity. You can build Minecraft versions of famous bits of architecture or sets for Shakespearean plays. You can place works of art inside of a Minecraft gallery, or use Minecraft's mathematically ideal blocks to talk about volume and area. Teach a foreign language with in-game signs, or tell kids they can only communicate with each other on a collaborative task in, I don't know, Latvian. The possibilities of what you can get into and out of a game which you thought was just for punching trees are endless. And kids respond because it's a creative, collaborative, entertaining environment where they are in control of their own challenges, which can be many. There's something like 1,000 Minecraft mods for all kinds of things. Like Computercraft is a mod which lets people write Lua programs inside Minecraft. There is even, are you ready, an official Mojang licensed version of Minecraft for education called Minecraft EDU. Spearheaded by Joel Levin, aka Minecraft Teacher, Minecraft EDU is to Minecraft what the Teacher Edition is to your history textbook, except cooler. With 20 installs at over 1,000 schools across 6 continents, the number of students currently learning with Minecraft EDU alone is at least 20,000. Now, am I saying that we're going to see Minecraft or even video games in general in every classroom? Probably unlikely. Setting up this kind of thing requires a certain investment in technology, time on the part of the teachers, and a certain technical proficiency which, I mean, we all know the chance a piece of technology will fail is directly proportional to the number of people watching it in operation. But should we hope to eventually? I say absolutely. Studies have confidently stated things like, data analysis shows that classes using the game had significantly higher means than classes not using the game. Source in the description. And the number of teachers documenting their overwhelmingly positive experience using Minecraft in the classroom is huge. Another source in the description. So the question might not be whether or not we use games in schools, but rather how far do we go? Game designer and...
So this is the question, is what are we going to do with games? I'm pretty enthusiastic about games, but he beats me by far. He's really enthusiastic. Now he's kind of selling Minecraft, but what I like to think about is, can we go beyond Minecraft? He's right. What's happening with games is limited because the games themselves are not fully immersive. The very most motivating, interesting, empowering games are violent. That's the reality. Even Minecraft has a certain amount of violence in it. I'm not suggesting that we should ignore the ratings and start putting 7-year-olds on Call of Duty or, World of Warcraft. But there are high school level programs, charter schools, that entire curriculum is built around World of Warcraft. So it's a really interesting idea to play with. And for me, it's an interesting idea, not just because of the possibilities, but because it injects itself in disruptive ways into the culture of the school. The school culture, especially at the elementary level, is as I've described it. Not a lot of gamers in there, not a lot of men, not a lot of messages going out to boys that they belong. Adopting games that they are actually playing communicates to them that their culture is important to us. So games is one way, but one of many ways that we can think about how to re-engage boys in their own education. Now, I have a wonderful research team back at Penn State. We've got a bunch of different projects going on. Actually, the work that Priscilla is doing is in flipped classrooms, and we're trying to think a little bit about flipped classrooms with relationship to gaming as well right now. Petner and Vashaw helped me look at teacher views, and Vashaw is specifically now working on an extension of this as to teacher views of themselves in elementary classrooms among male populations. So why are we losing elementary school men teachers coming in the door? What is it about, this job market that is not working for them? It hasn't worked for a long time, but it's significantly worse, and the worse it gets, it's not insignificant in my view. When you have a school that is filled with almost all women, the administrators are women, and you don't have a lot of men in the teacher's lounge, the conversation changes. What people say about the roughhousing that Johnny and Sally were engaging in on the playground changes based on who's around that table. Is it a mom of boys? Is it a girl who had brothers? Is it, a man teacher? So that conversation changes. The culture of the place is impacted by this. In the same way, we're trying to understand how teachers feel about video games, especially violent video games. And I'm going to show you a couple of video snippets from that. Jason Engerman and I are looking carefully at what do boys describe as their own learning? How do boys talk about gaming? And how do they express that in a way that we can take what they're telling us and map that onto the Common Core standards for off-the-shelf games? OTS is off-the-shelf games, all right? So when they talk about playing Madden or they talk about playing World of Warcraft or Call of Duty, what is it that we can take from what they're telling us? If you say to a boy, are you learning anything from that? They'll say, absolutely not. And if you suggest that they are, all of a sudden they won't want to play that anymore. It's like he said, I think I just sucked all the fun out of Minecraft. And if you take World of Warcraft and you wrap an entire curriculum around it, oftentimes you ruin that particular technology as well for kids. So part of it is that it's of them. It's coming from them. It is what they're interested in. It's taking the child where they are at that moment. But we're trying to understand what they're learning from the off-the-shelf games and map it onto the Common Core standards. And then Doug Wilson and I are looking specifically at issues around losing men in higher education. And that has been just a fascinating project. We're just now in the data collection phase of that. And so I don't have anything much to report to you from that, except that Penn State University enjoys a fairly 50-50 ratio. In fact, it's almost exactly 50-50. And part of the reason for that is that we used to be 60% male. So we have a long history of being more male-dominated at Penn State. As a result, right now, we're at 50-50. What's interesting is, among our failing students, 2/3 of them are male at the university. So we're seeing this same sort of pattern absolutely everywhere. Not all the men are failing, for sure, but of those who are failing, 2/3 of them happen to be male, and only 1/3 of them are women. Why is that happening? So we're trying to investigate that with further surveys, but also qualitative interviews, trying to get at what it is that men are experiencing on campus. This is a video with a number of clips that are raw data that I'm going to be sharing with you from teachers who are talking about their experiences of video gaming in the classroom, their experiences of hearing people talking about video gaming. Let me see if I can get to where I want to go here. Now, this fellow, let me see whether this is where I want to be. Hang on. Yeah. This is a learning support teacher, and she talks a little bit about the fact that her boys are really interested in this. The next person that we see, I believe, is this one. And she's the one that I'm perhaps most interested in. I'm not sure if I can get to the beginning of her, whether this is it or not. Let's see.
So they'll talk about that, or
Okay, so she basically is telling us what kids talk about in her classroom. She's an 8th grade art teacher.
the kinds of little levels or certification badges that they earn that show up on their status.
She's talking about Call of Duty here, and I want you to listen to the language that she's using around her depiction of their culture.
I think this is an online role-playing game, and the more you play, the more kind of badges you get, or something like this. Of course, then they also have skills, and then they play against other kids who are online. So they do things like poning noobs, which is beating up or killing the newbies, or, you know, showing their fancy footwork, I guess. I can only imagine that they're in a little action figure, and there's another little action figure that they're destroying in some way, or whatever they're doing to show their superiority. So poning noobs is what they live for.
I find this language really fascinating. When my boys were little, if I called one of their action figures a doll, I was in the doghouse for a week. Now, if you call anything that they're playing with as teenagers, and she's talking about 8th graders here, action figures, they're offended. If this was your culture that someone was talking about, if we thought about this as other cultures, you would be thoroughly offended by the sense that she's sort of looking down on it. There are these little badges, these achievements that they use to show their superiority, said in a fairly pejorative fashion, right? So this is an example of the kind of data that we're trying to mine and understand more deeply, and Mike Petner is in the process of doing additional data collection on this question to try to better understand, you know, how it is that teachers see this culture of boy gamers in particular. And it's almost universally boys. The earlier teacher, the learning support teacher, mentions that, well, it's all my boys can talk about, right? All right, let's see where we are here. This is Typing of the Dead. And it involves learning how to type. It's an educational game that involves learning how to type by killing zombies. And so here we ask teachers to tell us a little bit about what they think about possibly using Typing of the Dead in their classroom.
So you're learning how to type by killing zombies. And you're competing with someone else who's also typing?
It's like a co-op mode. So yourself and a teammate can work together to get through the level. And you both have to type.
Well, yeah. I guess sometimes you do what it takes to make it interesting. I don't know that killing zombies is the best approach in my eyes, but I'm sure the kids would be motivated to win and to learn to type better. I don't like the violence.
And even though this is kind of gruesome or whatever, that's what my age boys would like, and I have mainly boys.
Learning support teacher.
And if we get them to type, then I guess that would be okay with me, if the parents would be okay with it.
Violence is really probably one of the biggest things that keep video games out of the school setting, because in a school setting you can't have violence. I mean, it's just not going to be allowed.
Okay, so obviously violence is one of the main reasons that we can't have video games in classrooms. Violence, competition, individual achievement, and distraction. One of the earlier interviews, there's the gentleman who said, well, I guess if that's the only way you can reach him, right? He was clearly not interested in having this in his classroom, but he's willing to talk about it, I guess. He's willing to have a conversation. Earlier in his interviews, he shares that he is very uncomfortable with the use of technology in his classroom as a whole. And basically what he shares is, I have a really hard time keeping them on task. I have a really hard time keeping them doing what I want them to do. They're always wandering off and doing things that are not related to what I want them to get through. Now, he's in a tough situation, because the reality is that every kid walking into a classroom in America today at that level, at the middle school level, knows that the entire world is available to them on this, and they all have them in their pockets. They don't need somebody to tell them the content anymore. It's already here, okay? And he's trying to control that. But every kid is like, yeah, do what you want. I can find out whatever I need, whenever I need to, and I don't really have to listen to you. Alfie Kohn has a really great book called I Won't Learn From You about coercive learning. This teacher is in a bad position, though, because the politicians, the legislators, his supervisor, the public in general want him to cover content. And when he went through school, he experienced an identity formation process in teacher education programs in which he figured out that that's part of the role of the teacher. And most of us, having gone through public education, understand that this is the role of the teacher, that is the role of the student. Okay? That's what we all sort of already understand innately. But if we want to change that identity, it's really hard. Has anybody here read Education in Ecstasy? This book by George Leonard. You have. Excellent. If you've, and Priscilla has, that's because I made her probably. Okay. If you've never read this book, it's 1960-something, very old book. George Leonard, Education in Ecstasy. There's a chapter in there called Visiting Day 2001, written conveniently after everyone who was in the system at that moment would have retired, so that it wouldn't offend any teachers. The image that they give of schools is completely different than what we have for schools today, 15 years after Visiting Day 2001 would have happened, all right? And when I shared that with teacher education students at Penn State many years ago, I asked them for their reactions about this very different vision of learning, and they said, I hate it. Almost universally. There were a couple of people who said, I really like it. I think they said that because they thought that's what I wanted to hear, but most of them hated this image. Why? We talked to them, we tried to understand better why they hated it. They said, where am I? As a teacher, where do I belong in a system where I don't control the content anymore, where the kids are able to get all that content elsewhere? I don't understand who I am anymore. I don't know what my role is. So when we talk about how to integrate innovative technologies like gaming, like cell phones, like mobile learning into classrooms, we have to understand that we are dealing with a significant culture of teacher identity. That's sort of at the core of it, right? Rejecting violence is one of those pieces of that identity. They are the parentis in locum, right? Locus in parentis, whatever it is. I always get it wrong. So they feel that they have to take care of and make sure that these kids are not exposed to undue violence. Probably we do need to pay attention to this. We don't want to have, you know, Call of Duty in second grade classrooms. That's not what I'm advocating for. But I think that we also need to recognize that there is a significant amount of teacher identity in this question. Okay. So what's the problem with games? Violence, competition, and individual achievement, which are typically not something that we advocate for in our teacher preparation programs or in our schools. Violence specifically, there's a really wonderful book called Misreading Masculinity from Newkirk, and basically what he says is our problems with violence are very much situated in our imaginations of who is engaging in that violent experience. So in other words, we have a picture in our mind of boys who play violent video games. We also have a picture in our mind of boys who read Shakespeare. But some of what happens in Shakespeare is very, very violent. And yet we have no problem with boys reading Shakespeare. In fact, we'd be thrilled if our young men wanted to read Shakespeare. So it has less to do with the content, the violent content that's in there, and more to do with our projections of who those people are and what they're capable of doing. The media has done an excellent job of letting everybody know that kids who play violent video games end up Columbine shooters. This is not true. The research does not bear this out at all. In fact, the most recent research that's coming out seems to show things like kids who are in trouble with law, violent video game players and non-violent video game players, this is only a correlation, tend to not return as return offenders, repeat offenders. Interesting. Not what we expect. We would expect violent video game players would be more likely, but they're less likely. Why are they less likely? It's interesting, when you listen to the boys talk about this, and maybe we'll get to some of this, they talk about feeling like they can work out their problems. They can deal with the violence there. They feel empowered. They don't feel empowered in schools, but they do feel empowered here. They feel like what they do makes a difference and that it changes the game and they are engaged. Most people recognize the violent fantasy life, violent fantasy play for young boys is a normal developmental stage. For those of you who don't believe that, watch Raising Cain, fantastic PBS video. And again, the evidence on this is very mixed. Most of the evidence that's anti-violent video games is showing, in fact, that we have immediate responses. So they don't follow kids for 10 years and decide that because they played a video game, they likely carried out this violent act. Rather, they watch kids playing violent video games, and then they let them loose in a classroom to see if they tend to be more violent. And the findings there have indicated that, yes, they tend to act out more, not more violent, but more impetuous, less impulse control, things of that sort, immediately after the violent video gaming. About 15, 20 minutes later, all effects disappear. That's what the research seems to show us. Now, I can understand as a teacher that you don't want to live through that 15 or 20 minutes, nor are you really interested in learning all new games. So there's a whole bunch of investments involved in thinking about gaming that is very different from most teachers' experiences. Competition. So one of the things that's true about good violent video games that really engage kids, and especially if you talk to boys and you ask them what games they're playing, they're all competitive. They're all violent, they're all competitive. And in fact, kids like to, boys especially, but all active kids like to engage in competition. And we've moved to a place where we're really about the collaborative classroom, and it's very uncomfortable for some of these boys who are sitting there going, I don't want to work with that kid, he's mean to me. You know, I'm not getting along with him. And then, you know, the teacher says, well, we're all a family. We all get along here. We're a team, we work together. And it's really hard for the boy to figure out, how do I handle this? This isn't the way the world works. This isn't the way everything outside the classroom works. So how do I manage this space? Mostly I withdraw. I disengage. So a level of alienation is what's building there. Okay, now what do boys say? I'm going to try and give you a couple of snippets, although a lot of what you'll see here is really interesting to me more because of the way that they are interacting with the interviewer than necessarily what they're saying. So let me see if we can get some of it.
Like I said the last time, you're this little doll who is doing something bigger. Like,
well, yeah, I'll let you listen to him.
That's sort of what I get out of that game. Because you're in the game and you're experiencing a lot of these things firsthand, it helps you learn them in a way that you didn't think you could learn things like history before.
He's like, the one day he was just like...
History class, do you feel player learning?
Yeah, okay, this is the little one I want.
Is your and does it makes you like big difference when you go to history class? Do you feel...
Yeah, like if you're playing Assassin's Creed, you could relate some of the events to what you're learning in history. So that's
Is your teacher use any computers and ask you to do online gaming kind of stuff at school? Yes. And then we consider that as educational games.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, do you like that?
Yeah.
Can you tell me why?
Because it helps you get better, like develop that, like player learning. Like if you don't understand something, maybe that like a certain game can help you in that section.
Can you give me an example about that? Like
what? Fractions, you can go on like you can go on Study Island or Who to Math, and they have games on there that you can do.
Let's take another perspective.
Now, I find this young man's description, especially of educational games, pretty interesting. Educational games have been one of our biggest failures, in my opinion. And I even had an educational game developer, a person who is involved in educational gaming as like a CEO, say, well, you know what? It really doesn't have to be that good, Allie, because it's better than what they've got. When you're in the prison yard looks pretty good, really, right? So his lack of enthusiasm for educational gaming here and his lack of ability to think about how it's really helping him, I think is pretty illustrative to those of us who say we want to devote a lot of time thinking about educational games and how to create a better educational game.
Sometimes you're going to fail on tasks.
Now we're going to talk about failure, and I love this piece. He's talking about failure, and He's talking about what it's like to fail in school and what it's like to fail in a game. And he ends on a note that I think we'd all want our kids to feel about failure, right? When we want to build grit, it's about failure, about breaking through that wall. Listen to the way he talks about failure in school. I'm going to pause it in a minute, but it's pretty fascinating to me the way he talks about this.
Task at school, right?
Yes.
And how do you feel about that when you feel at school?
I can't really explain that, but it's hard for me to explain at least.
It's like failing. How do you feel?
I feel fine about it.
I love that moment, right? He knows what she wants to hear, that it's okay, but it's not okay with him. How does he feel when he fails at school? Crappy. I mean, can you just tell? And he wants to say that, but he's not able to express it. He's just a classic little boy. He's not willing to say to us, it makes me feel bad. It makes me feel less than. I've been judged. I'm no good, right? That's what he wants to say, but instead he says, I don't know how to explain it. She pushes him. He says, I guess it's fine. Like, is that the answer that you want? You can almost tell that that's what he's saying, right? Then he talks about failing in games.
You feel fine about that? Okay. Because the reason why I ask you, because you sometimes fail in a game, right?
Yeah.
And how do you feel when you fail in a game?
You'll be good if it's a game that you play online. You lose, but yet you come in first place. You'll have good attitude, positive attitude. You won't have negative attitude.
So even you fail, you still have positive attitude. And do you stay these two environments? Do you think they're similar, like failing the games and failing school?
They're not similar because in school you do not want to fail, but in a game it's all right to fail, just not in school.
So do you think failing is part of success in the game?
Yes.
Isn't that exactly what we really want every kid in school to say? Failing is part of success. This is about building grit, right? But failing a math test is not part of success. Failing a math test is a final assessment for them. It's an assessment of them as people, as achieving individuals. It's a really important message that this kid is giving us, in my opinion. He is really pretty alienated. It's interesting to listen to him trying to talk about educational games and trying to talk about his games that he plays all the time. He's right there. He can talk about it. He's articulate. He has no problem. But when he's trying to talk about school, he's really, really struggling. To me, that's the most interesting piece of what he's telling us.
The more you learn the hand-eye coordination from the controller.
So this guy's talking a little bit about eye-hand coordination. I think it's the next video, I believe, that I need to go to hear the college student reflecting on his experiences. He's a good deal more articulate, but also has some pretty interesting things to tell us. If we can get it to go.
The King of the Gods. And what he does is he's like the... I was doing it with, games. You just gotta walk away sometimes.
The guys talk about the things that they're learning about the Renaissance, about the medieval times, in things like Assassin's Creed, and in some of these, they learned how to speak Italian, all kinds of interesting things that they've learned in here, and that's kind of what we were interested in trying to get at. Let me see if I can back this up to the beginning of this fellow, because his whole piece is just wonderful, I think.
If you're doing something wrong.
I just think, when you play games like that, it does teach you how to deal with anger and frustration a little bit. You gotta learn to walk away from a problem, think about it, figure it out. Kind of teach you a little bit of problem-solving skills, I think. I mean, I use that throughout life, not just with, games. You just gotta walk away sometimes, think about it, ponder it for a minute, come back to it, try to figure it out again. Because when you're playing that game and you're playing in a team-based game, inside the game, you have to communicate, you have to be on the same page. And I think even in real life, when you're working in a team, in a job, in school, at a sports field, you got to be able to communicate effectively and clearly and to the point. And I think a lot of that in video games, you had to do that. You had to communicate clearly and effectively and quickly, get your point across and achieve whatever you're trying to achieve. And I understood.
He talks about all these things that he now understands that he learned from gaming. It's pretty hard for the sixth grader to tell you the same thing, but he is able at this stage to be able to tell you a little bit more in reflecting on what role gaming played in his own education. He talks about communication skills. He also talks about reading in context and understanding a different language in context here in a minute, and he talks a lot about dealing with his own anger and failure.
Other people's strengths and weaknesses and how to communicate with people, because you got to be able to talk through things and understand people. And if someone's getting angry, you don't push them, push them over the edge. If I'm getting angry, I learn how to cool myself down and not lash out on people, you know what I mean? So it did help quite a bit, I think. Just based on where you were in the game and a word came up that I didn't know what it meant, I would have to think about, all right, where am I? What am I trying to do? What do you know what I mean? I would have to think of where I was in the game and how this word relates to what I'm supposed to do next. You just really had to think about it and try to figure it out. In the real world, every day I have to use it because I'm reading college level books now, and it's some words I just don't understand. I wasn't exposed to them. I had to try to figure it out, use context clues every day to read nowadays, opposed to reading high school books where that was my reading, that was vocab I was exposed to every single day. So I think it definitely helps me out later on in life. I know now not to, if I don't understand the word, I'll just give up. I keep reading on, I go back and all right, that's what it meant. I try to figure it out, like, okay, I don't understand it now, but going back and reading forward and understanding a little bit more, I can go back and try to piece together what it means now. And I did that a lot in video games when I was younger. I didn't always understand what it meant, but I always went back and I had to figure it out to understand to go move on in the game. Because at that age, it was an enjoyable problem-solving step. It's not like I was sitting in math class and learning how to do problem-solving skills, or sitting in a reading or writing class and analyzing text, and it wasn't forced upon me. It was a fun way, and I was doing it without even realizing it. So it helped me out, and I was doing it for fun at the same time. Definitely helped with problem-solving skills. I'm not the strongest math guy, so I think my problem-solving skills are kept up to date through video games to an extent. I thought it taught me a lot of teamwork, a lot about cooperation. It taught me how to manage anger, my frustration level, how to deal with losing. It definitely helped me deal with losing. So yeah, I think it helped me overall.
All the things that we would want them to say about their school experience, they're saying about games. Right, so I find this data to be absolutely fascinating. I love hearing from them and getting a sense of their voice, getting a sense of what they're really telling us about their experiences. And the way that they frame it is fascinating to me too, because it's clear that they are attached to gaming. It is part of their culture. They're able to be very articulate about it, and they're really struggling. They're very alienated from school. It comes through in everything that we see in the data. Okay, so for me, what becomes really interesting is teachers in schools are rejecting game culture because of violence, competition, individual achievement, things of that sort. Yet when you hear the kids talk about it, they don't say anything about, I learned to be violent. They don't say that. They say, in fact, I learned how to manage my anger. I learned how to lead teams. I learned how to cooperate. I learned how to communicate. All the things that we would like them to say about school culture, they're saying about game culture, which I think is really interesting. School culture makes them feel manipulated and controlled and not like they really have any stake in what's happening. They are not engaged, and this is what concerns me. So there are lots of ways that we can approach this problem with boys and active kids. We can put exercise balls in every classroom for the kids who need to move a little bit when they're learning. Good idea. I'm not against any other options. Lots of other options. But the rejection of violent video gaming is a rejection of a particular kind of culture. And in my opinion, pushing on that envelope forces us to confront the school culture that is alienating boys and active kids right now. So for me, I'm interested in thinking about violent video games because it addresses this cultural issue. So how do we use games? Well, we don't use educational games because they're not really what the kids are interested in. That's the reality. If you want to see a bunch of kids go run screaming on a summer afternoon, tell them we're going to play an educational game. They will not want to come to you, I can guarantee you. What we need to do is take them where they are and begin to change the culture at the same time. That's what we need to focus on. Who are they? Where are they coming from? What kinds of things are important to their culture? How do we show them, how do we express to them that their culture is in fact important to us? And that's all I have. So if we have, I think we have a couple of minutes for maybe a couple of questions, or maybe we're out of time. 3 minutes. Okay, so we get an early coffee break then, unless anybody has anything else I need to announce or take care of. Oh, good, she has one more announcement. Thank you so much for your time today. I very much appreciate it.